good reason for that. And we can see it with Musk and Northern Ireland at the moment, and his various other kind of insertions into British public life. He has somebody who has just been confirmed a trillionaire. You know, it's a ridiculous state of affairs, which kind of surely must bring home revolutionary thoughts to even the most conservative with a small c of people. It's just been confirmed a trillionaire. He controls one of the most powerful information or disinformation systems in the world, Twitter. And he controls Starlink. There is all sorts of open questions about Starlink and the recent presidential election that brought us Trump. So he's somebody who has amassed enormous power, not by any genius that I can observe. You know, maybe there are hidden qualities to the guy, but he seems to be this kind of clownishly ludicrous individual. But he has a kind of, I mean, Britain's not alone. He's meddled in German politics too. But he has a fixation with the United Kingdom and immigration and these kind of rather juvenile sort of learn your history on TikTok kind of ideas about civilization and the West and all this kind of stuff. The sort of kind of stuff I presume you grow up within apartheid South Africa, which is where he's from. And he has, in effect, engaged in kind of an active war against Britain. Not to kind of go too far into the realm of hyperbole. When you are encouraging mass violent uprisings in cities like Belfast, which see, pogroms, basically, people of colour, their houses burned down, largely the loyalist community mobilised to attack basically, foreign nurses in many cases who come to be employed in Northern Ireland to deal with Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK's crippling labour shortages in critical skills. And you have this guy who kind of tells us two stories. Musk tells us, firstly, the story about the kind of accumulation of wealth and power in the neoliberal era and the post-neoliberal era, which I believe us to be in now, where you leave wealth alone and tax income, placing the burden of taxation on middle and lower income earners, thus eventually wiping them out and replacing them with a kind of serf class, which I think is, if we don't do something pretty drastic, is on the way. And because you leave wealth alone, it just accumulates and accumulates and accumulates and concentrates and concentrates and concentrates till you end up with trillionaires. But also, the basic unit that has stood in the way of trillionaire wealth accumulation and the creation of a new serfdom is the nation state. The state that taxed wealth in the middle of the 20th century, and that was the kind of political consensus that was capable of doing that, which was overthrown from the 1970s onwards. So we now have, as I've said before, states that can barely function. States where the basic business of law and order is something that they are reluctant to do when there's a trillionaire undermining it. And this is an alarming snapshot of the future, is when Keir Starmer is kind of flushed down history's toilet, as he is soon to be. Will Andy Burnham be the kind of civic nationalist kind of figure who says, in this polity, American tech billionaires do not call the shots, don't matter what, no matter how rich you are. Are we going to get that guy? I don't think so. I think we're going to get a guy who is beholden to tech and Wall Street. And the asset stripping of Great Britain will continue. And when a tech billionaire decides that, yeah, maybe they're going to have a little dabble in British politics and race relations and street violence, they can. They can. And the more that British society is left open to that, the more you're going to find them take those opportunities. The mildest regulation at the moment of the internet, rightly or wrongly, the mildest regulation of children's access to the internet, to phones, the mildest regulation of things like as fundamental as indecent images of children being manufactured by AI online is facing monumental pushback in America. From America, the kind of cod language of liberty and free speech being used, whereas in reality, the fact is that all sorts of toxicity and harm from largely American tech platforms is very good for business. So we've got two stories: the concentration of power in the hands of the wealthy due to the innovations of the last 50 years, and the collapse in state power. How long will that continue? Well, there will perhaps be a reversal, but Britain will grow poorer and weaker the longer that the country refuses, unlike many other policies around the world that are waking up now, the longer the country refuses to exercise any of the power that is actually at its fingertips. The state can do all sorts of things. The states have currencies and armies and police officers and foreign ministries and spies and spooks and all sorts of stuff. They just have to have political will. And that is what is so far non-existent. And part of the reason for that is because there's a generation of people that have entered British politics certain in the understanding that they're not really meant to do anything. They're not meant to show any political will. They're not meant to have any ambitions. What they're meant to do is caretake. Caretake for a little while until another bunch comes along, and then you toddle off to the House of Lords or go and do a podcast with the opposition, with a Tory, or whatever it's going to be. And then, your position in a kind of a middle tier of the ruling hierarchy is nice and secured. But what you are walking away from is more and more decline. And there was a generation of politicians of both stripes in the middle of the 20th century, from Macmillan to Wilson to Heath, who didn't see their role as being that. They had some idea of, some notion of the future. But we don't have that. And the reason why is because neoliberalism precludes it, or the post-neoliberalism kind of tech feudalism that we're in now. So, what are we going to do?